Good morning. Lovely morning. Thankful to be here. Appreciate your attendance. We're studying Ezekiel, the 23rd chapter. Ezekiel Chapter 23. Today we're going to talk about hola and hola. Hola and holeba. Two characters that are part of a metaphor, or in fact a metaphor, an illustration. This is a very interesting chapter. As we've talked about before and as we've observed in our lessons here in Ezekiel, God instructed him to present his lessons in various modes, object lessons, and just all kinds of machinations. It would have been interesting to have observed Ezekiel in that setting and all the kinds of things he did. Laying on his side for so many days, and then his other side for so many days, and just all the antics that he went through to get their attention. I suppose it was a matter of getting their attention. And now, in today's chapter, we are introduced to this hola and a holeba. Hola, the book indicates, represented Samaria. And holeba represented Jerusalem. Now, Samaria, of course, was the capital of the northern Israel, the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes of the north. And of course, Jerusalem was, in fact, Judah, the southern tribe, the southern two tribes, including mainly Judah. And you wonder why he uses these characters to review the history of the Jewish nation. It is very interesting that he uses these illustrations. Now, in a nutshell, these two girls were there in Egypt. And there was a covenant developed there in Egypt between the children of Jacob and God. There was a relationship, and in this case, and as often the case, God is represented as the husband of the wife, the Jewish people, and particularly these two illustrative characters. And they go back and in time there. He reviews the sordid history of the Jewish people. Now, why wouldn't he just come right out and say, this is Jerusalem, this is Samaria, you've been bad? I wonder why he uses this illustration of these two girls being espoused to God or having a covenant relationship with God. Why would he use those? Why would he use that intimate relationship of marriage? Marriage between God and the Jewish people. Why would he use that? That illustration. I mean, the illustration becomes very, let's say, direct. It becomes very sordid. I mean, these two are portrayed as prostitutes from the beginning. And there's all kinds of explicit sexual relationships here that are put out in the scene. So as we think about that, let's go to God in prayer, and so that He helps us to really, as a body here, to understand this. Cole, would you lead us in a prayer?
Our Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for letting us be here today to study your word. Lord, we thank you for your word, and that we may be able to look back on previous people and how they worshiped you and how they disobeyed you, and we can take and apply it to our lives, and we may live in service to you. Lord, please be with us as we worship you today. We ask all in Jesus' name.
Amen. So again, why this, using this kind of an illustration with all kinds of specifics as to the nature of their whoredom, the explicit nature of their whoredom, including bestiality. I mean, Ezekiel's words just really sink to the heart of evil. Now, why? Well, I don't know. Any ideas why he would go? He would make this so personal. Well, maybe that's it. He was making it personal. It was put on a level that they could really understand. They understood what infidelity would do to a marriage. They understood what infidelity would do to human relations, and how it would be, what reaction there would be to it. So maybe it was just kind of, try to get them to buy into this whole thing, and help them to understand why Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, why the temple was going to be obliterated, just destroyed, leveled. And as Ezekiel uses the terminology, as he explains the evil nature and of them, he says that this punishment is going to be so that they know that he is the God. Now, this describing this relationship, this harlot relationship here, Israel made alliances with other nations. And why would they do that? Why would they make alliances with other nations? Economical reasons, political reasons, military reasons. They wanted these they thought these alliances were going to protect them, right? Now, back in the history of Assyria, Assyria took away the northern tribes 100 years before the information that it was revealed here. Assyria took away the northern tribes, and at that time, Sennacherib, the president or the king of Assyria, went after Jerusalem. And you'll recall that his army surrounded Jerusalem. They were just like a sitting duck. They were just there. Couldn't get in or out. And Isaiah figured into this equation. And they had the king of Assyria had 185,000 soldiers, military people, right there ready to assault Jerusalem. And so Isaiah and the king had a conference, and Isaiah intervened as a prophet. And what happened to the 185,000 Assyrian army people? In one night, what happened to them? They were killed. Dead. Now, you would have thought that, as the people of Israel, the people of Judah, as they looked upon this thing, as they understood this, you would have thought that they would depend on God rather than some military alliance, right? I mean, how much greater lesson could they have than God destroying 185,000 troops? And don't you know, later on, some of those kings were making political alliances, military alliances with Assyria. In fact, before we read Ezekiel in the 23rd chapter, let's go back and look at 2 Kings, beginning with the 16th chapter, and get a little flavor of what was going on there in terms of these alliances with these other nations. And it'll take a little time here, so if you want to turn to the 2 Kings, 16th chapter, it says in the 17th year, Pekah the son of Remaliah, Ahaz the son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. Now Ahaz, he was of Judah. That's the southern tribes. So where Jerusalem, he was ruled in Jerusalem. He was 20 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 16 years in Jerusalem and did that which was evil. It's the way that the Scripture says that it did not that which was right in the sight of the Lord his God, like David his father. But he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, yea, and made his sons pass through the fire, according to the abominations of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out from before the children. Now, what was wrong? What was involved in them making alliances with other nations? Well, see, each nation had a set of gods that they thought those gods would protect them, and as the Jews consorted with other nations, they started obeying the law. They started the idolatry. They got caught up in the idolatry of the idols of these other nations. And these idols caused people to be morally corrupt. There was a lot of sexual activity connected with this idolatry. You see, a lot of debauchery connected with these idols. Well, so this Ahaz, he acted like the northern kings, and he made his son pass through the fire according to the abominations of the heathen. He sacrificed his own sons to the god of Molech. That was a foreign god, you see. Well, you can't get much worse than that. The Jewish religion, the law of Moses, would not require that. So that would be an abomination. That child sacrifice would be an abomination to the law of Moses, you see. Well, let's see what this Ahaz character, ruling in Jerusalem, did in addition to that. He sacrificed and burned incense in high places on the hills and under every green tree. And then Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to war. Okay, now God said, they were supposed to be God-fearing and believing that God would protect them. But so the northern tribes, fellow Jews, sons of Jacob, they came to war against Jerusalem, and as well as the king of Syria. And at that time, verse 6 there of the 16th chapter, at that time Rezin king of Syria recovered Elath to Syria, that was the Jewish territory, and drove the Jews from Elath, and dwelled there to this day. And Ahaz sent messengers to the king of Assyria, saying, I am thy servant. Now, how do you like that bowl of beans? He says, I'll pledge subserviency to you. I'll give up the sovereignty of my nation and serve Assyria. I am thy servant, thy son. Come up and save me out of the land of the king of Assyria and out of the hand of the king of Israel. Of course, that was before the northern tribes were carried away into Assyrian captivity. And Ahaz, in verse 8, took the silver. Now look what he did. He took the silver and the gold that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house, and sent it for a present to the king of Assyria. What's wrong with that? He took that which belonged to God, did what with it? Sent it over to Assyria, the king of Assyria. Now that's pretty cheap. That's pretty evil. And the king of Assyria, then, here's the alliance, the partnership now. And the king of Assyria hearkened unto him, for the king of Assyria went up against Damascus and took it, that is Damascus, Syria, and carried the people of it captive to Kir, and slew Rezin. And King Ahaz went up to Damascus to meet the king of Assyria. Notice I skipped the big long name there, Tiglath-Pileser. And he saw, while he was at Damascus, and King Ahaz, now remember he's the king of Jerusalem, sent unto Uriah the priest the fashion of the altar. He saw an altar there. Now, did they have an altar in the temple? Was that altar made to God's specifications? Well, obviously. But this king, this Ahaz, he saw an altar there in Damascus, a pagan altar, and he sent Uriah the priest the fashion of the altar, that is a blueprint, a print of the altar, and a description of the altar, the pattern of it, and according to all the workmanship thereof, and all the the details of it. And Uriah the priest built an altar according to all the king Ahaz had sent from Damascus, so that Uriah the priest made it against for King Ahaz came from against King Ahaz came from Damascus while he was returning, while the king was returning to Jerusalem. In verse 12, and when the king was come from Damascus, the king saw the altar, and the king approached to the altar and offered thereon. Now, pagan altar now. And burnt offerings, and his meat offerings, and he's poured out his drink offerings, sprinkled the blood of his peace offerings upon the altar. And he brought also the brazen altar, which was before the Lord, from the forefront of the house, from between the altar and the house of the Lord, and put it on the north side. So he displaced God's altar with the pagan altar that Uriah had fashioned according to the blueprint. Down in verse 15, upon the great altar burnt morning offerings and evening offerings, and the king's burnt sacrifice and his meat offerings with burnt offerings of all the people of the land, their meat offerings and their drink offerings, and sprinkled upon it all the blood of the burnt offerings, and so forth. Thus, in verse 16, did Uriah the priest, according to all the king Ahaz commanded. And then King Ahaz, he cut off the borders of the bases, some of the furniture of the temple, some of the structures of the temple, and removed the layer from off, and took down the sea from off the brazen oxen. That was set up by Solomon, decades earlier. And the covert for the Sabbath just smeared the law of Moses. Well,
when you read this and think about it, think about how many religions today have changed, how many churches have lost their way because they see something another religion's doing, whether it was the instruments or all the ways that we've gotten so far as far as the world has gotten so far off from the church by seeing something like there. Saw an altar wasn't right, but they copied it. And how much religion today has been copied even though it's wrong.
Ned is saying here that how Ahaz altered the law of God, the worship of God. The same kind of thing happened to the church. Think of how pure the church was in the beginning, and then think of all the innovations that have been attached to the quote the church in general, the Christianity in general. Think of all the innovations and modifications, whether it be instrumental music, just a whole array of things. And then somebody comes along and said, hey, well, this looks like a good idea. So they bring it over to their group, and even people in the church sometimes want to copy some innovation that the broad religious world, is engaged in. And so, that the concept, the community church is kind of that concept, We'll change the worship, we'll change everything, just maybe to appeal to the masses. Well, good comment there, Ned. And so, this king there, seated in Jerusalem, did those kinds of things. Well, then, did that work? In the 17th chapter, it says, in the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hoshea the son of Elah to reign in Samaria. So Hoshea is now over there in Samaria reigning, and he did that it was evil. Well, then he came up against Samaria. That is, Assyria then came up against Samaria and destroyed the northern tribes. And then, as we look at the 23rd chapter of Ezekiel, you can see these things, and we may come back to the 2 Kings here as we look at this to get the background of the narrative. Now let's go to this narrative of this illustration, and it gets pretty explicit here in this chapter. Verse 23, or chapter 23, verse 1, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, there were two women, the daughters of one mother, and they committed whoredom in Egypt. They committed whoredom in their youth. There were their breasts pressed, and there they bruised the teats of their virginity. Apparently, these Jews in Egypt were engaged in some sort of idolatry. Exodus doesn't tell us, doesn't say that necessarily, right? I haven't read anything in Exodus would indicate that. But think about this. When Moses came back, he asked the question, when he came back from the wilderness after 40 years taking care of sheep, God appeared to him in the burning bush. When he came back, what did he ask God about who he was, who God was? When God said, you deliver the people, my people Israel. Moses said, well, who should I tell him you are? So that seems to indicate that those Jews in Jerusalem or in Egypt didn't know the God of heaven. Is that right? Why else would he say, why else would Moses say, who shall I tell him sent me? And God said, just tell him the I am. Now, did those people readily accept Moses and the God and the I am, the God? Did they readily accept him? Well, it's a rhetorical question. They at one point they said to Moses, get out of the way. You're causing us trouble. When they got into the wilderness and they didn't like what they had to eat, what'd they say? Well, we had flesh pots. We had gizzards, or we had ham. We had steak. We had flesh pots. Leave us alone, Ma. Now, we don't have in Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy, we don't have the complete everything that happened in the wilderness, but so we don't know all of what happened. But was there ever a time in the wilderness when the people thought about organizing to go back to Egypt? Yeah. Was there ever a time in the wilderness where they got organized and put together a golden calf and said, this God is our God, right? When Moses came down from the mountain, from Mount Sinai with the law of Moses, with the 10 Commandment law, and these people were terrible. God was so angry with them that he told Moses, let me wipe them out, and I'll raise up a nation for you, after you. And Moses interceded at that point in time. Well, from their youth, from their sojourn in Egypt this way, and to use this metaphor, this hola and holibah, he says in verse 4, and the names of them were Hola, the elder, and Aholibah, her sister, and they were mine. God says they were mine, and they bear sons and daughters. Thus were their names. Samaria is Ahola, and Jerusalem is Aholibah. And Aholibah, and Ahola played the harlot, the prostitute, when she was mine. And she doted upon her lovers, on the Assyrians, to her neighbors. Now, Ahola, they were making political alliances with that is, the Samaria is making political alliances with Assyria. And what did the Assyrians do? Eventually they came in, took them captive, carried them away, killed them, killed some, took some captive. So, and the Hola played the harlot when she was mine, and she doted on her lovers, on the Assyrians, her neighbors, which were clothed with blue captains. Boy, these nations around about and their gods had appeal. I mean, these different gods had quite an appeal for the Jewish people. He says, and here's how he describes that appeal, which were clothed with blue captains, rulers, all of them desirable young men, horsemen. You see the illustration there. They were appealing. The illustration says that these people were appealing. Well, apparently the Jews, the other gods, the other nations were appealing to the Jews, and that's a description here, an illustration. They big handsome young men with all decked up in their regalia and so forth. Thus she committed her whoredoms with them, with all them that were chosen men of Assyria. They made political alliances with them. They apparently got connected with their gods and worshipped with all them that were chosen men of Assyria, and with all on whom she doted. With all their idols she defiled herself. I brought it down to that brought Jewish history down to a personal level where everybody could understand, I suppose. Verse 8, and neither left she her whoredoms. Now, notice this. Neither left she her whoredoms brought from Egypt. Apparently, their idolatry that was apparently practiced in Egypt carried on through the wilderness and eventually throughout the ages of Jewish history. Neither left her whoredom brought from Egypt, for in her youth they lay with her, and they bruised the breast of her virginity and poured their whoredoms upon her. Quite graphic here. Wherefore I have delivered her into the hand of her lovers, into the hands of the Assyrians, upon whom she doted. Now, what would in a relationship, what would a person do with a spouse or that was in infidelity? You see, God's trying to get them to understand. They could relate to, if a spouse, if a woman were involved in infidelity, in that culture, they would strip them naked and put them on display, shame them severely, and then of course the Jewish law would require further punishment. But I think putting it this way, they could understand, or they should be able to understand, why God is going to destroy them. Not only destroy them, but shame them. Their legacy would be that of shame throughout history. They discovered her nakedness, and they took her sons and her daughters and slew them with the sword. Now that's the Assyrians now, and then we're talking about northern Israel. Now, you see, at this point in time, northern Israel had been carried away 100 years ago, 100 years before that. But he uses them in this illustration to make the point. They discovered her nakedness, and they took her sons and her daughters and slew her with the sword, and she became famous among women. That was the legacy of it. They had executed judgment on her. And when her sister Aholibah saw this, she was more corrupt. Now think about that. Judah became more corrupt than the northern tribes. And they're right where the center of Judaism was, the temple, the whole thing, right there. She became more corrupt in her inordinate love than she, and in her whoredoms more than her sister in her whoredoms. She doted upon the Assyrians. Now remember Ahaz, we read in Kings. What did he do? When he was under threat from Syria and from the northern tribes, what did he do? He called out to the Assyrians to save him, Now, did that have a long-lasting relationship? No. Because, in world affairs, you'll see countries that are lined up together in some kind of an alliance, they have good relations in one decade, and the next decade they have, they're at war. Well, that was the way it was there. She doted upon the Assyrians, her neighbors, captains and rulers, clothed with gorgeous horsemen, riding upon horses, all of them desirable young men. You see that? All of this appealed to the Jews. All this worldly power that they thought was, power, that appealed to the Jews. Then I saw that she was defiled, and they took both one way. And verse 14, and that she increased her whoredoms. For when she saw men portrayed upon the wall, and the images of Chaldeans portrayed with vermilion, that's a color. Vermilion's a color. Now, apparently they were, imagining how, what would it be like to be with those people, those men, girded with girdles, verse 15, upon their loins, exceeding in dyed attire, all dressed up in magnificence, and upon their heads, and all the princes to look to, and after the manner of the Babylonians of Chaldea, the land of their nativity. Now, the northern tribes, they were buddies with Egypt and Assyria, and then Assyria turned on them. But now, Judah not only was dabbling politically with those two nations, but also now Babylon. And so now the Jerusalem was all infatuated with the Babylonian group in the illustration here. And in verse 16, and as soon as they saw them with their eyes, she doted upon them and sent messengers unto Chaldea, or unto Babylon. And so now they're getting involved politically, religiously with the Chaldeans and the Babylonians. And the Babylonians came into her land, into the bed of love. See this, how this illustration comes across. And the Babylonians came to her into the bed of love, and they defiled her with their whoredoms, and she was polluted with them, and her mind was alienated from God. They forgot God completely. They were so infatuated with the religion of those and the power of the supposed power of those nations that they just forgot God. So she discovered her. Now verse 18. So she discovered her whoredoms and discovered her nakedness. Then my mind was alienated from her, like as my mind was alienated from her sister. God's mind was alienated. He gave them up. He gave them over to the Assyrians, that is the northern tribes. And now God is saying that my mind is alienated from her. I'm finished with her. I'm finished with Judah. I'm finished with Jerusalem, is the message there. But even with that warning in verse 19, yet she multiplied her whoredoms in calling to remembrance the days of her youth. Apparently they were, in this illustration, they were thinking back to, their relationships with those Egyptian gods and all through history. They were we might say daydreaming about that kind of stuff. Calling to remembrance the days of her youth, wherein she hath played the harlot in the land of Egypt. Going back as far as Egypt. You've done it all these years, these centuries. Verse 20, For she doted upon her paramours, whose flesh is the flesh of asses, and whose issue is like the issue of horses. Bestiality is implied there. I mean, people that had even one righteous bone in their body would abhor that kind of behavior, you see. But not the Jews. Not the Jews. People with just a little bit of righteousness would understand. Sacrificing babies, burning them alive to God, Molech, was bad. I mean, who, with any kind of conscience, who would not abhor that kind of behavior on the part of the Jews? Verse 21, thus thou callest to remembrance the lewdness of the youth and the bruising of thy teats by the Egyptians for the paps of their youth. Going back to the idea of idolatry as far back as Egypt there. Verse 22, therefore, O hola, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will raise up thy lovers against thee, and from whom thy mind is alienated, and I will bring them against thee on every side. Well, did the Assyrians assault Jerusalem? Yep. Did Egypt from time to time assault Jerusalem? Did the Babylonians eventually assault Jerusalem? You see, the point is, they were, on a personal level, they were lovers, but the lovers turned against each other. You see, people could kind of understand that relationship. But by using this hola and holabab, they should have been able to, on a personal level, understand what God was feeling toward the nation of Judah and the nation of, previously, the nation of Samaria, or the northern tribes with their capital there at Jerusalem. Therefore, in verse 22, therefore, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will raise up thy lovers against thee, and from thy mind, and from whom thy mind is alienated, and I will bring them against thee on every side. Now, you see, the Babylonians are coming. The Babylonians didn't come after the northern tribes, but now Jerusalem. But Babylon is coming. And the Babylonians and all the Chaldeans, and now not only that, but Pakod and Shoah and and all the Assyrians. Now, so Jerusalem is now going to be bombarded by even these desert tribes, these lesser nations. They're going to join in with the Babylonian assault. Everybody's going to be against Jerusalem. So the Babylonians and all the Chaldeans, and Pakod and Shoah and Koah, and all the Assyrians with them, all of them desirable young men, in this illustration, captains and rulers and great lords and renown, all of them riding come on horses. They were in this illustration, they were impressed by all this mighty army, the might of these nations. And they shall come against thee with chariots and wagons and wheels, and with an assembly of people, which shall set against thee buckler and shield and helmet around about, and I will set judgment before thee, and they shall judge thee, that in the sense of punishing, judge in terms of punishing, punish them according to their judgments, and I will set my jealousy against thee, and they shall deal furiously with thee, and they shall take away thy nose and thine ears, and thy remnant shall fall by the sword. They shall take thy sons and thy daughters, and thy sons and daughters, and thy residue shall be devoured by fire. We'll stop there at verse 26 next